Hey there, TC Mabe with TC Gaming. Wanted to bring you video 3 in our Getting Started series. In the previous couple of videos, we talked a little bit about setting up your character and doing some animation things with moving your skeleton, or your mesh rather, onto a different skeleton where you have similar skeletons is one of the ways you could generate some animation data for your character to get that thing up and running. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about in this process is actually using the Retarget Manager to set these up and then transfer the animation blueprints over using that process. So we'll get right into that and then we'll kind of pick up from there. So if you had your third person project, and in the third person project you would have your mannequin character. If you were trying to figure out where this all came from, an easy way to identify this is when you look at the world settings for your map. If you don't see anything in here, you can go to the settings in your project, and under the maps and modes, there's a default game mode with a selected game mode. So in this case here, you have the third person game mode and a default pawn class of a third person character. So if you click that, it'll take you to find the third person character. And from there, you can go to the mesh. There's your mesh. And if you were to go and look for the mesh and minimize here, you can see where the mesh is at. Or you can right click and say find skeleton. This is kind of a roundabout way, but sometimes you're left with trying to figure out where things are. And that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is if you were to go all the way up to the content level of your project and you go into your filters, you could select animation and then skeleton and use your filter options to locate all the skeletons in your project. And then you just identify the one that's associated with, whatever your blueprints are. Now, you may not know that that's associated with your blueprint until you started your game mode up, but if we go here, we see that that's our third person character. You can also come into that blueprint this way. Edit third person character, gets you in here and helps you identify what's in use and where they're located. This is the path to it. So it's actually in the mannequin character mesh SK mannequin folder. So if we go there, bring you into that location. Just a quick way to kind of figure out where these things are. So what we want to do to retarget this, if we go into the mannequin mesh and open that up, we should see our option here for Retarget Manager. If you don't see this window, you can also fire it up by hitting this and it'll bring it over. So what we want to do is on our rig, we want to make sure that we have a humanoid rig. And when you're doing the one for the UE4 mannequin skeleton, this will automatically map everything correctly. You typically don't have to worry about anything except for making sure that you have a preview mesh specified in the preview scene settings. And then just hit save. And we check one time on our view pose and see what pose we're actually in. If this pose is not the way we want it to be compared to the other character that we're going to target things onto, we need to fix these and get them in the same position. Otherwise, you're going to have some anomalies when it comes to how the bones are rotated. So in this case here, our character is in what's typically referred to as an A pose because they kind of look like a long letter A here. And if you look at this, again, holding in the Alt key, I can move around. This is my left mouse button and Alt key combo held down so that I can spin this character. And you can actually look down here and see that his arm is pitched a little bit forward. So it doesn't come straight down to his sides. It actually comes down and then it goes out at like maybe, I don't know, 30, 35 degrees, something like that. About 30 degrees maybe. So normally, if you have another character that's in a T pose, what you would do is grab a hold of different bones on this character and rotate them into the correct position for your retarget. And I cover this in several other videos on my channel. You should go and watch those processes if you're a little confused about where these things line up and what I do. Real quick, I typically do bring in this here with the left arm, the upper left arm, or the upper right arm. I normally bring these up to about 50, and then I take the forearm down about 30, and I'll take it back around 30. Or I'm sorry, up. Yeah, I'll show you. If I go in the rotation here, I would actually bring this up about, that would have been 50 because I had 10 previously. I would take the lower arm down 10 and bring the hand up like 10. And you can see I'm just doing that with that select and rotate objects tool. And when you look at that, the only other thing that's left to do is to take that lower arm and you would roll that back about 30 degrees. And now you can see it kind of straightens the arm out. So it puts him into more of a T pose. Okay. Now I'm not going to lock that pose in because I want to keep this in an A pose. But in the Retarget Manager, if I were to say view pose or hide pose, that would have shown me the actual pose. if I want to save the changes to a pose that I make, I can go into modify pose and say use the current pose. So in summary there, if I had like say upper left arm and I rotated that up like 50 degrees and I wanted to store that, I would have to go down here to, hold on, we got to leave it on there first. Say up, and then I would go to modify pose, use current pose. And now when I view the pose, you can see I can toggle back and forth between the two. And if I want to reset that, I believe you can just go back here and reset it and it'll give it back to its natural state. We want to save that. I'm going to leave him in the A pose, just kind of explain a little bit there. Now also in here, in your mapping for the humanoid rig, I said this is automatic. I normally like to check these anyway, and I also go to show advanced because this is where it's going to handle the hands and some of the things with the IK and other portions of the body. We'll talk a little bit more about this Retarget Manager in some future work where we might have a skeleton that has more bones than we're trying to send data to, or vice versa. We might have a character that has a smaller number of bones defined than what we have off the source mannequin skeleton. And in those cases, you only specify the bones that are actually in common between the two to send animation data to. But anyway, we've set our animation mannequin skeleton here into our A pose. We verified that we have a humanoid rig on here and we have a preview mesh assigned. And then we would go over to the character that we want to retarget things onto and find that character. Now in this case, we have our barbarian and he has a mesh folder in here. Now I've moved some things around, so if you had a copy of this character, it's not quite the same. But in here, I do have the SK Barbarian skeleton with everything on that. So I would go to this skeleton, I would look at his preview, and same thing, he's in this A pose. Again, I'm holding down Alt and the left mouse button here. You can see his arms kind of pitch forward there, similar to how the regular mannequin is. And on here, I just go for the rig. I want to pick the same humanoid rig. And again, I would check the mapping to make sure that these all line up. And as I was saying, it's important that if you have bones on here that are being auto mapped from this, you just typically check the skeleton and make sure that those things actually exist. You don't want to try and send data to bones that aren't there normally. Sometimes it'll cause you problems where it's assigning things to the wrong bone in the hierarchy. Also, we check the show advanced to make sure that this all got mapped correctly, index to index, middle to middle, pinky to pinky, ring to ring, so on and so forth. Every once in a while, you'll catch an anomaly in here, not with this particular asset, but you'll catch anomalies with some assets where they'll have like a random assignment because it couldn't figure out what the bone names were. We have a preview mesh on here, and everybody's good, so we're going to hit save on that. And now that we have both characters in the same pose, what we do is we go to the thing that we want to put on something else. So in here, we're going to go to mannequin animations, and he has this couple of different assets we could retarget. If I wanted to retarget individual assets, or for example, I just wanted the jump animation, I could right click on this and go to retarget anim asset, duplicate anim assets and retarget, and now I show my source character, which is the mannequin, and the select skeleton for the barbarian, which is my target. And down here you get a couple of options for prefixing and suffixing and replacing portions of strings and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to tell you from my personal experience, I used to prefix and suffix stuff because I thought it'd be easier for me to find things later. It's actually more complex if you do it that way, because if you're in menus where you're dropping down to replace animations, the names will spread them out in a way that you're not going to be able to find them very easily. So I like to leave them named the same thing, and then I just change the directory that they go to, and I'll typically create a new one, which we're going to do in a second. I want to do more than one. If you had those options set and you put your correct folder where you wanted to load this, then you would just hit retarget. And as long as this thing lines up, it would move that one animation over. You could also do the same thing with selecting a range of multiple animations. And typically that's how I would do it for montages, which we'll talk about a little bit here in a minute. But the third person Anim BP actually has references to all these things in it. They're embedded in here for the movement of the character. So if you go and look at the third person Anim BP, for example, in the Anim Graph, you have this state machine in here, and the state machine, excuse me, has an idle. My goodness, sorry about that. Has a idle run blend space. This third person idle run, and you can see here this animation for third person idle, third person walk, and third person run are all referenced in here. So when I go to duplicate this third-person animation blueprint, it's going to retarget the animations and the blend spaces and everything that go along with it. So I'm going to do that because it's going to give me the best use of all the options that I want for given motion of this character. So third-person Anim BP, retarget Anim blueprints, duplicate, select the barbarian skeleton in this case. I'm going to hit change for the directory. I would go to my barbarian folder where I am going to put these and hit new folder. And then I just normally call these retarget underscore anims or like RT underscore anims. And I put them under the folder of the character that they belong to. So I'm going to hit OK. And you can see I have that reference there now. And I'm not prefixing or suffixing anything. And I can hit retarget. And you see it brought all those files over with it. If I hit save all there, I can now open up individual animations and you'll see that that character is now playing out of this folder all of the different things that came from the animation blueprint that was originally off the third person character. Now, the other thing I like to do is after I've retargeted this, I want to go and rename this asset because this is not it's not from the third person anymore. It's actually my barbarian Anim BP. And then same thing here with this third person idle run. This is really the barbarian idle run. And we can just do that after this. And you can change all these if you wanted to, but I'm not going to worry about those as much as this because these show up in menus later for other things that we're going to do here in just a second. So now that I have my barbarian animation BP on here, it also, as I was saying, changed all the different references. So if you look at these idle run blend spaces here, you can see that it's actually calling the animations that are in the barbarian RT folder, RT anims. And what we want to do, if we wanted to change what character is running around in the game here, we can go down to our third person blueprint. And in the blueprints here, we have that third person character, which we talked about from our settings, project settings, default game mode, under maps and modes. There's that third person character. What we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this. And we're going to call this barbarian. We can type character, and then I'll just call it BP for blueprint. So that's my barbarian character blueprint. And right now it's referencing the mannequin. So I would go in here and I want to change the mesh that's associated with this. So in this case, the skeletal mesh is going to be the barbarian, and it's the full body barbarian. You can see him in the preview window here. You'll also be able to see him over here in the viewport, and you can see that if I hold the Alt key and spin him around, he's not animated or doing anything yet, and that's because we don't have an anim class assigned. Now we just renamed ours, so it's easy to find the barbarian anim BP, and when I turn that on, he now starts to animate. And remember, in our previous video, if we had used the one that had just the body on it, we'd have to go in and assign a construction script in here. We would use a master pose component to bind all of his parts together. We'll probably talk about that again in other videos as well. But if you missed that from the previous video, I do cover that in there. So now that we have that assigned, we have our barbarian mesh on the barbarian character blueprint. And the reason we wanted to make a duplicate of that other one is because it brings over all this control logic for us, which is going to be used to move the character around, and we don't have to manually do any of that stuff if we just duplicate the blueprint and reassign these. We also, again, this is a copy of the previous character. So now we have the barbarian character BP in here. Go save all again. And now over here in the game modes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the game mode override for this map level to be the same as what's in the defaults. Or I could, if I wanted to, I could go into settings, project settings, and into the defaults. And I could put those in here. Now, if you put them in here, every time you make a new map, these are the settings that'll be applied when you're playing, as long as you don't have any overrides in there. That's why these are called overrides at this other level, a game mode override. But I'll do it here just so we can see it. I go to third person game mode, and it automatically pulls up all the references that are stored in this third person game mode here. I could also have created a barbarian game mode and then put some defaults in there. So maybe we can do it that way too. Why don't we do that? We'll change this. We'll duplicate it. We'll call this barbarian game mode. And under the Barbarian game mode, under the default pawn class, we can go in here and assign this to be our Barbarian character blueprint. And then compile and save. That's the only thing we need to change. And over here now we can just use our game mode override to be the Barbarian game mode, and it'll automatically pick our Barbarian character here. Now, if you hit play, what's going to happen here is that you're still going to have this other character in here because we never took him out of the scene, and he's the automatically possessed pawn, which we'll talk about in future episodes also, some of the possession things that happen. So if I delete this guy out of the scene, now what should happen is it should bring my Barbarian in because he gets spawned over here at the first player start or network player start that's in this map. So it spawns the Barbarian over here, and because I copied over the blueprint, I can now run him around and do whatever was in the other character's blueprint because I just moved it over that way. So that's a simple way to get animation onto your character. Now what we have is the Barbarian using the mannequin's animations. So what we want to do is we want to go into our Barbarian animation, sorry, in that RT anims folder. And in this Barbarian anim BP, we actually have idle run and walk motions that are probably better for him. So here's the third person idle, third person walk, and the third person run. But we also have those same things for the Barbarian. So if we go in here and we type in idle, we can filter this down, and we have the Anim Warrior idle. And if we look at the folders that these are in, we have them with weapon and without weapon, right? And then you have, you can see them, and it's just, you have to go to the thing that says one with weapon, and then two without weapon, and then there's like a third one and a fourth one in there. But if I go to the idols on here, we're just going to go ahead and do the one that shows up in here. It doesn't matter if it's with or without, because later on we'll use a different one. But you just drag this over here. So there's the idle, and that should replace it. Now I have Anim Warrior idle. I want to get a walk thing, so I can go over here and get walk. And we'll go Anim Warrior walk. Just replace that right there. And then over here it's a run, so we go over here and type in run, and we'll find an Anim Warrior run. Just drag that over there. And now we've replaced those with his actual animations that go with that character. So he runs a little bit differently. See how he's got his arm out to the side off to the right? And the reason is because he would normally have a battle axe in his hand. So if we were to take a look at that, you could also see this with doing preview assets on these things uh, in the animation for these. So I'll show you that in a minute. But that's one way we could go in here and change those particular things. And if I go back now, he should look a little bit better while he's standing still because this is actually kind of more tailored to that character's frame. And again, when he runs, see, he runs with his arm out there to the side. And he runs just a little bit differently than the other one did. Now his jump animation is still coming from the mannequin. And if we had, I don't think we have a jump or jump loop for this guy. But if we go to the animation graph in that state machine for his jump start, there's a play third person jump start here. And in this particular one, they have a start and a loop and then an end. So we'll just look. I don't think they're in here, but if we go to jump, he does have an Anim Warrior jump, but I think his is a full jump up and down, which is different than the one that's here, which is actually just the start of the jump. And we could change that later, but I'm gonna save that for something else. Right now, we'll just use the mannequin's jump loops and everything for that. That's a real quick way to go in there again, setting up some animation data and getting your character to run around and be animated, and then to change some of the basic animations that are in there. So I'm going to show you another process that if we wanted to do this kind of more, that's not necessarily from the ground up, but by leveraging a couple different things, what you can do is you can take your mannequin or any other animation. You take this third person anim BP. We're going to open that up. And we're going to go back to the event graph and back to the default anim graph section here. And you can actually copy this whole thing and paste it into another graph, and it's going to fail because the animations that are on it are not tied to the skeleton that this was tied to. But you can get a uh, all the programming in place and then swap out the animations and it'll work. And I'll show you that right now. So the other thing we could have done is if we go to the barbarian and we go to the mesh for that barbarian, we can go down here and take the barbarian full. And actually, I think we need a skeleton. Let's go up to a skeleton. I think it's probably going to work better. So let's go to the barbarian animation mesh. And we'll right click on here and say create Anim blueprint. And we'll say barbarian Anim BP. And I'll just call this new, just so we understand, because we already have another one in there that's got the same name. So we'll save that. Now, if I open that animation blueprint up, there's nothing in here, nothing under the Anim graph, nothing under the event graph other than these defaults. So what I was saying is we could open that, leave it open. I just minimized out of the way. We're going to go to the mannequins animations and open up that third person animation blueprint. And I'm going to go to the event graph. And I'm just rolling the mouse wheel in and out. I'm going to roll that out. I'm going to highlight all the things that go with that. I'm going to hit Control C to copy it. Now there's two variables here, is in air and speed, that are not in this blueprint. You see I have no variables here. And also there's an event blueprint update animation and a try get pawn owner that are already being used in here. So what might happen when we drop these in is it might break and we have to just tie these things back together. So I'll show you. Very easy. I'm just going to move these out of the way up here to the corner so I have a little bit of space. And I'm just left clicking out here in the middle, and then I'm going to hit Control V to paste these things in. Now, it did bring in the event blueprint update animation and the try get pawn owner, and it adopted them from the ones that were in there. So it was okay. It went ahead and rebound itself. But what will happen is when I go to compile this, it'll fail because it doesn't have these variables. You see down here, you'll get these warnings. So if you double left click on any of these little spots, it'll take you to wherever the failure is. You can also see them in here that they're red. But I'm just going to double left click to go through them, so it'll pull you to this one. And what we can do is we can right click on this and say create variable. And it'll create whatever variable we need, and it'll make it of the type that's required to satisfy this. So if I hit compile again, you see that one went away. Now I have a set speed. I double left click. Speed's not in here. Again, if I right click up in the top section here, you can see create variable speed, and it creates that variable. And you can see the details of it still by clicking on it. So it creates speed called of type float. And again, I'll hit compile. Now those issues should go away, and everything looks pretty good. Now, if I were to animate this, I still don't have anything going on here. And the reason is because in his Anim graph, he doesn't have a default output pose. And you'll have to kind of just see what I'm doing here and then do a little bit of research in the background to get up to speed on how some of these things work, because I don't want to get too weedy with this. But the output pose, if I were just, for example, to stick an output pose on here and say that's what I want him to look at when I compile it, he'll just always be playing that thing. So normally this is where your control state machine comes in to say if I'm in an idle state, play the animation for idle. But if I move forward a little bit, I'm starting to walk. So play the animation for walk and put that to the current output pose. And then if I, move my controller all the way forward and I want to run at a certain speed, play the animation for my speed that I'm running and put that to the output pose. So everything that's in here that is in these state machines or these graphs or whatever gets output to the output pose at the end, and that's how we see our character animate. Now, what I want to do to make my life a little bit easier is I'm going to go over to the third person Anim BP again. I'm going to go to their Anim graph. If we look in here, there's only one default Anim graph in there. I'm going to go back to this Anim graph. I'm just going to take this entire state machine, hit Control C, go back to the Barbarian Anim and hit Control V. And there you go. Yeah, I should have been in the Anim graph when I did that. Hold on. Okay, so I deleted that and I'm going to go back in there just to show you. I accidentally pasted that in the wrong spot, or it didn't pull it out of the buffer. But if I go back here to the third person Anim BP, I'll right click on it this time and hit copy to make sure I grab the right thing. Then under the Barbarian Anim BP in the Anim Graph section, I just right click on here, or I'm sorry, hit Control V and it brings over that default state machine. Okay, so again, I should have just right clicked on this and said copy, bring it over here to the Anim Graph and then paste it in. Now, if I hook this up, what would normally happen is whatever's in this default state machine at whatever state it's playing based on control input and other variables and things like that would go to the output pose. The difference here is I don't have the animations that are in that are tied to this particular skeleton. So when I hit compile, I'm going to get all these different failures in here. Okay. And what it's saying basically is the references, right? The idle blend space over here references a blend space that uses a different skeleton. So if I go into that little section, it's saying there's the mannequin that's actually being used for this. So if I am in the Barbarian NMBP, I can go into the state machine, and all I have to do is go in here to idle and run, and I can open this third person idle run up that's in here, and we can actually swap this one out with the one that goes to the Barbarian. So watch this. Here's your third person idle run. We have over here, third person idle run that was pulled in as part of our other setup. So where's it at? Third person idle run. There it is. Barbarian idle run. I forgot I renamed it. If you drag that in, and then we can just plug this speed and this output to that. And now I can go ahead and compile, and that'll make some of those errors go away. And then we can go in here, the third person jump start. Same thing. We have a jump start that's in our Barbarian, so I'll go jump. And that's the third person jump start from the Barbarian, so I'll pull that in and hit play there. Swap that one out. Compile. And then we have the third person jump loop. Double click on that. Go over and get our jump loop. Drag that in. Swap that out. File. And then I also have the one for the third person jump. And third person jump is here. And we just go through and we progressively change these. Now, it's for me, sometimes this is quicker than messing around with trying to rebuild all these from the ground up, because all I have to do is replace them, so I already have a really good guide as to what it is that needs to be changed. And again, you just keep keep compiling through there. Okay, so you see that it had a slightly different arrow on it, so I had to click on this side to get over to the thing. So here's a third person jump start that has a time remaining ratio. So you pull in, you say third person, and it's just the same name that's up here, third person jump start, and it's time remaining ratio of third person jump start. But it's the one that's tied to this character now. I'll just replace that value there, delete that. And that's half of this is because I'm also trying to talk while I'm doing this. And same thing here, there's a third person jump asset. So you just say, again, time remaining ratio, but it's third person jump, and it's the ratio, time remaining ratio of third person jump. And it'll pull the reference in. We can just swap these out. This is also helpful sometimes if you have a character that has its own set of animations that are on a different skeleton or whatever, and you don't want to go through the retargeting process, but you want to use this control logic. So basically, just to recap, what we did is we pasted that in there. We went in here and we added the variables to it by using that add variable thing. We pulled over the animation graphs on here and then just updated the individual references and whatever else was in here for these transitions get modified by going through that list progressively. That's kind of an advanced way of doing that. If you're lazy like I am sometimes, I'll get these up and run a little bit quicker that way. But again, I can go through now, and that animation blueprint that we just made manually was down here on the mesh of this. We called that NMBP new. So just to verify that that works, I can go to the default pawn class, Barbarian character, go to the mesh over here, and then Barbarian Anim BP was the old one. And we'll just switch it over to Barbarian Anim BP new. Back to the viewport again, you can see he's still working the same way. And if I go out here and hit play, he's now using that new animation blueprint, which is a hand copied. Okay, now here's something that's changed. Now this one here, I'm glad I hit that. The reason that's doing that is because when we brought in the animation blueprint, when we made this new blueprint under the Anim Graph for the jump starts, you have to highlight on these, and you want to take this loop animation thing off on the jump start because it's going to keep trying to play that. So the jump start, you don't want to loop. The jump loop, you do want to loop. And then you go back here, and the jump end, you don't want to loop. You want to play those two one time and then play the loop in the middle until you're back into a spot where you could land on the ground. So now let's look at our jump again. Now it plays the way that the other one did. Okay. And we can go up here. And if there's any kind of hitches in these things, like there might be a little bit of timing or something, you can change those by looking at what the other settings are on the other one and kind of blending them in for these particular animations. But hopefully that helps you guys get a little bit more understanding of how that whole thing's set up. You have an animation graph, and then the animation graph has state machines in it. The output of the state machine drives the output pose of the character, and you can build them by hand. I could have done the same thing just by putting nodes in here. You know, I could have typed in play third person jump and drug that in there, or I can just replace them by copying them from something else and bringing them over. The other process, of course, with the retarget for the animations should be something you're kind of familiar with some of my previous videos, and if not, please go back and watch those. Again, my name's TC Mabe with TC Gaming. Hopefully these videos are helping you guys and not confusing you more. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. I'm calling it a getting started, but it's also kind of a getting started in a more direct and advanced way that might help you get somewhere quicker. So thanks again for watching, and I appreciate all the subscriptions, by the way. We had a pretty big follower increase over the last couple of videos, last couple of months or whatever, and we hit 1,000 subscribers. So I appreciate all you guys taking the time to hit that like and subscribe button. I'm not asking you to do it. I'm just telling you I appreciate it. Thank you very much, and take care. Stay safe.